everybody, welcome back to Music Impossible. Professor Jim here. We're going to finish up our work on clefs today and then get into the grand staff a little bit. So if you remember when we were talking a little bit last time about the C clef, and the C clef is very clearly recognizable in that it looks like sort of a letter 3. And if we go up here, we can see it again. Here's our tenor clef there. And the tenor clef is right here where it meets in the middle is where middle C. And just like the C clef, the treble and bass clefs have their origins on a specific note. The treble clef, also known as the G clef, started out many years ago looking more like a G, a stylized G. And over time, as it's been transcribed, and there was for years many different interpretations of what the G clef looked like, and every composer or orchestrator had sort of their own little artistic signature version of the G clef, before it finally settled on this version right here. And it has this spirally thing that wraps right around that second line of the music staff, which is the G in treble clef. So the G above middle C. So that would be G4. Learn more about the different octave notes here in a moment. And then bass clef also is called the F clef, and it has its origins in a very stylized letter F, and it has evolved over time, just like the treble clef, to look like it does today, with the 2 dots on either side of the F line. And there are other clefs out there that look like a bass clef. In fact, Sibelius here, my notation program, has a few of those in it, and we could go right here and turn it into a baritone clef right here, and the dots are on either side of, well, it's still called the F clef, so that's right, that would be the F. So the third line would be the F in this case. Our most used one here, the typical bass clef that we see, is going to be on the 4th line, and that is the F below middle C. Also in front of us here is the grand staff. The grand staff is a term we need to know, and that is when we have 2 clefs together. It's the combination of the treble and the bass clefs, and it's mostly used in piano music and harp music. Xylophones sometimes are written with grand staffs, as well as sort of hymn style 4-part choral writing. We'll see grand staffs for that an awful lot. And when we start creating different scores that we're going to look at, we're going to look at a score here in just a second, the grand staffs are included in these scores, but they look a little bit different in the sense that we're going to group different instruments together. So here's a score I worked on for a film. It's a waltz, and it's for full orchestra. And what we see here pictured here is we have sort of the solo celeste instrument up here, and then the woodwind section, followed by the brass section, and there's more below here with percussion and strings and things. But just for illustration purposes, just want to show you how this is laid out. When we have a staff that is connected by a bar line, you might see what looks like a thin bar line, just a regular bar line, and it runs all the way down the entire score, and we call this a system. A system is when we have multiple staves that are connected by a bar line or, in some cases, a bracket or a brace. This score that I set up has an extra bracket here in addition to the bar line, in addition to this bar line system that is connecting the instrument family. So here we have the woodwind family is connected by this one brace or bracket. And then we have the brass section is the same way. And if we were to look at the rest of the score, the percussion and string sections are also connected that way as well. Now, as we start to turn the page on clefs and we get more into the staffs and what they look like, let's talk a little bit. We're going to go back to Sibelius here. Let's talk a little bit about different octaves of notes. Now, if I were to play a middle C, let's do a middle C on a whole note here. See if it'll play for me. Right There, middle C right there on the staff. Now, we call this C4, and it's C4 because on the piano keyboard it is the fourth C. And so middle C is C4. And also middle C in the bass clef is right there. The exact same note is C4. And reason why we have all these different clefs, and we talked a little bit about this with the C clef, is if I'm writing a passage of notes here that that might be, and I'm going to write that little melody there in the treble clef. Well, if I take this same series of notes and I put it here in the bass clef, what's going to happen? I'm going to have some crazy ledger lines. So if I'm writing this piece of music and I'm on a bass clef, this is going to make sense maybe to switch to a alto clef or a even treble clef to make sure most of these notes are on the staff, where we don't have all of these extra lines we call ledger lines. And it just becomes difficult to read. It becomes muddy. The music is confusing, especially when you're working in scenarios like film scoring, where a lot of the music is sight read on the spot by the musicians, by the players. So C4, D4, E4, same exact notes here, C4, D4, and E4. Another illustration, if I wanted to have a different melody here in my treble clef, maybe, let's see, I don't know, let's do Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in the key of G, and I want to have this same series of notes here. Yeah, that's just crazy, right? Nobody wants to try to count all of those ledger lines and discern that in the bass clef. So obviously we're going to write that in the treble clef. Same thing if I were to do it in the bass clef. Let's see, I don't know, let's do Twinkle Twinkle in the key of, I don't know, A. Let's do it with the right rhythms. Start with quarter notes. All right, now we want this melody down here in the bass clef. What does that look like in treble clef? Well, way too many ledger lines. Nobody wants to read that. And so it's important to know which octave we're writing in and what is the appropriate clef to use as we go. So this A right here, this would be A2. This is actually the third A on the piano keyboard. There's an A1 below that. Looks like that. There's even another A below that. It's the lowest note on the piano keyboard. We call this A0. Down here, A1, A2. We can move all these up a step. And then here we would have B0, B1, and B2, and so forth. And as you go up the octaves, the notes will change numerically like that. And then as we understand more about these octaves and how to label them, kind of a cool tool here in Sibelius is I'm going to go ahead and play, I don't know, let's play C5. C5 with a whole note. It's right there. C5, third space C is C5. It's down here on the bottom in Sibelius. It tells you exactly which pitch it is. So there you go. See, it's C5 right there. It'll tell you everything about the note that's highlighted at the moment and what that is, what it's for. All right, let's see. And then the piano goes all the way up to C8. So if this is C5, we'll go up an octave. C6, C7, and C8 is the very tippy top of the piano keyboard. Way up there is C number 8. There's a few specialty clefs we're going to talk about in the next lesson that helps make this a little bit easier to read if we wanted a piano player to actually play that note in a composition. There's different ways that we can notate that. We're using clefs and other ways to make that a little bit easier to read, especially sight reading. Nobody wants to count all of those ledger lines. And the last thing to look at here is going to be just what all of those notes look like, both on the piano keyboard and on the music staff. So let's take a look at this graphic right here. We can see all the way down here at the bottom, we have A0 and B0, which we demonstrated, and then C1. So C1, and then that whole scale from C to B1, C1, D1, E1, F1, G, A, and finally B. Here's the 2 octaves, C2 to B2, and so forth. C3 to B3, C4, we switch to treble clef as we go up. And we're seeing this AVA symbol, meaning octave higher. So even though this says B7, this is an octave above where it's notated here. It would be off the screen in this particular graphic if we went all the way up to C8 and B7. And the corresponding places they are on the piano keyboard is down here. C1, C2, 3, 4. There's middle C right there. 5, 6, 7, and finally 8. Don't forget, and this is sometimes a trick question that pops up on the test, A0 and B0. The only 2 zeros that we have in music theory. So there are those 2 notes down here, as well as, we have a B flat, A sharp, 0 as well. All right, that's our lesson for today. Tomorrow, the next lesson, I should say, when we pick this up, we're going to get into some different performance considerations, some weird clefs. We get into accidentals and notation going forward before we wrap up this first section. So we'll have probably 2 more lessons, and then there's a little break where we have a test, and there'll be some study materials for you to look at, including note cards, as well as anything that's been on a quiz up until this point is going to be fair game for the test that are going to be at the end of these chapter sections we're getting into. And we'll divide it up in these little bits. Save all of these tests, save all of these quizzes, the note cards that we create for you, print them out, save them. They're going to be great resources and study tools down the road. All right, we'll see you at the next lesson.